Coach, pressure probably is not the right word, but just because of the sheer numbers and the young guys in your room, do you feel, is there a sense of urgency there that maybe hasn't been there in the past with you guys at receiver?
Yeah, I think there's got to be a sense of urgency. I think we're obviously young. I think the good thing about being young is those guys are able to get more reps, and that obviously heightens their sense of urgency, but also creates an energy and gives them experience and practice that will relate to the game. So with youth, obviously you lack experience, but those guys are making up for it by the amount of reps they're able to get in practice.
Yeah, with this offense, Kelsey, what's the challenge of getting a first-year player ready to understand all the nuances that you have to have at the receiver position, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think the first thing with getting any first-year guy, high school, or if they come from a different university, I think you got to get them used to speaking your language. I think you got to get them used to seeing things from a like perspective where we can have the same dialogue. And then once they get here, it's just about operating. We play really fast. A lot of things we do are really unique. So it's those guys getting themselves in the building, putting themselves in position with the daily habits on and off the field to be able to be successful. I think they've done a good job. I think obviously they lack in experience, but you watch this group and those guys are in the building in their free time, really all time of night. Our assistant receivers coaches and position coaches, both of those assistants are raving about, the questions those guys are asking in those extra meetings, and it's only going to help those guys and help the game slow down for those guys. So they've done a good job so far.
How much do you feel like a guy like Travis Smith and or Rodarius, especially with the older guys being a little dinged up and being held out during fall camp, how much have you seen them grow? Like, can you look at a practice they had in March and April and go, wow, they are light years ahead of where they were then?
Absolutely. I think it's important that when you see it, you tell them, like verbally, and I think also showing them the difference on film is extremely important. I think when they can see those visuals, it adds confidence into them, and you'll continue to get some of those results. But both of those guys are light years ahead from terms of how we operate, also just being familiar with what we're doing on offense. Like, they look like different people than they did in the spring and April.
At this point in fall camp, what do you see from your wide receiver room that's different from last season?
That's a good question. The first thing that stands out is I see young guys stepping up, right? Mike and Brolan Sale, for instance, both of those guys came into the room last year. We had a bunch of vets. They were typically more quiet, like trying to feel their way through. From the time they get to the meet room this morning, like those guys are setting the tone. They're already minding guys about coaching points and installs. So I see those guys taking jumps. I think the next thing is guys see, how the season ended last year. They understand that we got to be deeper, right? Regardless of age or how old someone is, like we got to be able to be deeper. So it creates a sense of urgency for guys, even if they're not starting, to be ready at all costs. Those would be the two biggest points that I've seen from last year to now.
Eric, Adam, and
Where's Amari Jefferson from? I know that he was dinged up when he got here. He didn't play a lot last year, and a new guy. Where is he from the starting camp to where he is now? What does he need to do the next couple of weeks to be in position to help you guys?
Yeah, Amari's done a good job. He's in the group of guys that, is always in the building. I think for him is just continuing to get his body in playing shape, continuing to get his conditioning to the level that he needs to. And he's trending towards that. And I think if he keeps doing what he's doing, like he'll continue to make grounds towards that.
Has Mike Matthews moved around to all three different positions? And how much, since your numbers are a little low, how much are you thinking through scenarios of games at this point? If this guy's not available, how you need to move guys around, those sort of things?
Yeah, I think before, you start spring ball, you got to designate, for one, what guys can handle that capacity. And I think guys ultimately show how much they can handle in their mental capacity. Mike's one that's done that. It's been other guys in the room that we have that we've designated, you can play any spot, right? So you got to be ready for it. He's handled it, and I think he's handled it well because he's always wanted to prove it. I think for him as a freshman, he was frustrated a lot last year. We've talked, he wanted more snaps, but he also understands that he's got to be able to handle that capacity. And what he's shown this offseason is not only the conditioning to handle it, but the maturity, right? When success happens, he's still got the same day one mentality and motivation that he did to prove it. And when reps don't go as well, he's not down on himself. He's not losing confidence. So I think that maturity paired with his physical conditioning, I think he's proven to us as coaches that he can be able to handle all those spots, and that's why he'll be there.
I believe it was Brolan Sale. He said he's spent a ton of time in your office either going through the offenses, learning more about the defenses. How much can you appreciate somebody like that really trying to be like a student of the game?
I think Braylon's awesome because as good as he is, as talented as he is, he's a really good kid and he's really curious. He's a guy that, you want other guys to come in the building and try to model themselves after. And I'll give you something else. Mike and Brolan are like tied at the hip. They're best friends. They're always together. And both of those guys have had a ton of growth from last December until now. And I think it's directly correlated to the time they spend in my office together and the time they spend with one another together. Extra catches, extra meetings. Those guys are doing things on their own in the summer. I think anytime you got like one teammate that's, in your hip and they're pushing you and they're motivated, I think that's going to make you better. And I think both of those guys have benefited from their friendship and, the bond that they have.
You mentioned how important it is to tell the young guys when they're doing things right, kind of going along the right lines of doing things. When did you learn that as a coach was so important to kind of remind them that they are on the right path, and why is it important to you as a coach to be able to express that to them?
Yeah, I think you take from your own experiences. I played the position, and I remember vividly like certain experiences and situations that either I had that helped me or I wish I had that I wish, a coach would have did and think it would have helped me. And I think you got to add those. I also think it's important to know, what you're dealing with this generation and the type of kids they are. Some kids are triggered by different things. Some kids are motivated by different things. And I think as position coaches, it's our position to study those guys, know that, and then in turn you get the most out of them.
Yeah, one, where is Chris physically? I know he's just now getting back, but where do you think he is physically with a couple of weeks to go here? And two, you talked about, things driving different players and all that stuff in this generation. How do you ensure that those guys, young guys, stay confident, don't get down on themselves whenever somebody says something or something happens on the practice field? How do you ensure that they don't kind of lose that confidence about themselves?
That second was a good point. For Chris, he's obviously hadn't had a ton of reps. He's got to get his body into shape. I think he's got to do that. He took a big step in that today. He was able to kind of come along today further as he's been this fall camp. But he knows he's got a ways to go in that realm to be able to play and do what we need him to do. And then in terms of your second question, I don't think you can really, you can't really like create confidence for guys. I think you always got to talk to them about responding. Because as coaches, we don't know the scenario on the field that they're going to deal with. We don't know the pressure, the situation on the field. It'll always be ebbs and flows. I think it's important to talk to guys about that and talk to them about, when success happens, my mindset should be in this direction. If failure happens or it's not a great rep, my mindset should be in this direction. That way they got, a foundation to get back to regardless of what's going on. I don't think you want to create confidence for them. I don't think you want to curate it. I don't think that's real. I think you talk to them about, what it's like to play in this league and how drastic momentum and ups and downs can be individually and as a unit. And again, back to my earlier point, I think you show them game film of what that looks like from a receiver perspective and also an offensive perspective. And I think you talk to them and give them a foundation. When this happens, right, it's a negative. Our mindset's got to be here. We got to be more positive. We got to choose to stay confident. And then we have a good player, a successful player, and explosive. It's got to be day one mentality. Get back to work, get lined up fast, get back to my fundamentals and my cues. I think as long as you give them a foundation, they can self-correct. I don't want to always be the one to correct them. I think if they can self-correct, you ultimately get a bunch of coaches on the field, and that's what we want.
Kelsey, you go back to Mike and Bray's class, and then this past year's class with Travis and Rodarius and Joe Kim, and then the one you have committed right now. You've been on a nice little run in recruiting. What do you think you're doing as a coach that's resonating with parents, resonating with kids, that's allowed you to have the success in recruiting over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think for one, I think being authentic, I think showing those families and those student athletes, you got to show them the real you. I think it's so easy in recruiting to just give them all the highlights and the success stories. Like, you got to give them the stories where you failed. You got to give them the stories where you've dealt with adversity. Because I think ultimately, like, perfection, people can't relate to. I think once recruits and families, they see the success automatically when they come here. I think once you give them a couple of those stories about, you know, where we had to deal with adversity or you weren't successful, how you battled back, I think that makes you relatable. And I think nowadays kids want more than anything in recruiting. They want to know you can develop them. They want to know you can get them better, but they also want to know you care, like, about them in the society. Like, you got to be relatable in order to do that. And I think that's what's helped us in recruiting.